Welcome to my art channel, and thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring it. So I'm finally here with another video about making comics. This is something that I've promised many times before, and unfortunately I seldom get around to actually making these videos, but here I am, and in this one I will be talking about how I approach thumbnailing / storyboarding pages for my comic series called Gloaming Veil. So far I've only completed the prologue, but it took a really long time to get there, and I'm pretty excited to tell you guys about my process. And I'm just quickly going to say that if you're new here and you've never watched my videos and you haven't read my comic yet, please do so first. You can read it for free at gloamingveil.com. It shouldn't take you any more than like a couple of minutes, and so do that first and then come back to this video afterwards, because I will be going over the storyboards for the prologue, and I'll just be basically taking you through the first version of it, what changes I made. I'll show you some of the script, and we'll just generally talk about how I approached this very important, arguably the most important task of comic making. So before I get into it, I think it's important to let you guys know what programs / apps I use for creating my comic, and for the most part it's just 3. So I use Photoshop for all the art related stuff. I sketch, ink, do just everything in Photoshop. I do really want to switch to Clip Studio Paint at some point because it's significantly cheaper and very similar otherwise, but unfortunately, because I've just used Photoshop for so long, I'm accustomed to it and I haven't been able to make the switch at this point yet. And for writing, I only use Scrivener. I used to keep Google Drive documents, and it was a mess. I used to have notes and iCloud notes and like all these different places, but I have since kind of organized everything into one place, and that place is Scrivener. So you can check that out. I'll hopefully remember to leave a link below. And the third really important app I use is PureRef. It's basically just a blank board that you can drag and drop reference photos into, and I find it extremely useful. I use it all the time for all sorts of different things, and yes, those are the 3 main apps that I use. As far as equipment, I use CINTIQ. Well, actually, you can just scroll down my description and all the equipment are listed there. So now that that's out of the way, as you can see, obviously I'm using Photoshop for the thumbnails, and there are a couple of things that I will concisely tell you about that I think are seldom mentioned but are super important if you're actually taking this very seriously and are looking to make a book version of your comic in the future. So the very first thing that I did was to make a template file for the thumbnails. This file is designed to approximately include 1 chapter worth of thumbnails, more or less, because I do the thumbnails 1 chapter at a time usually. And this template has the same ratio as the final pages, and not only that, but it is set up in a way that they are double page spreads, so I will see how the book will look 2 pages at a time right off the bat from the thumbnailing stage. And also I like to include the bleed and the live area around, like, so that if I have some images that I want to bleed over the edge when I eventually print the book, that's already accounted for. And all this is because the thumbnails that I make are detailed enough that I actually take them, like I just copy paste them straight into the final page files after they're finished, and I sketch right over the thumbnails. So I don't redraw the pages after looking at the thumbnails. I use the thumbnails as like the first sketch, the under sketch. So it's kind of hitting like 2 birds with 1 stone for me, and I find that it's more efficient for me to do this rather than do storyboards really quickly and then like draw them out more properly later on in the process. So yes. So just a quick instructional order of progression. What I did was figure out how big I wanted my book to be. I think it was like 8.5 by 11. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, I think I decided on a regular letter size, bigger type of comic. It's bigger than American comics. So basically I started with an actual page template that is a double page spread, and I included bleed and live area and all those little things there that I could see. So the thick outline around the thumbnail templates you see here is the bleed, actually. And I started with an actual double page spread file for the final pages that is equal to the size of the final pages for printing, because I basically just copy pasted that straight into the thumbnail file afterwards and just duplicated a bunch of times. So therefore it is a one-to-one, like, smaller copy of the final page template. I hope that makes sense. It helped me a lot, and I hope it helps you as well. It took me quite some time to land on this particular template, and it's been my favorite so far. Unfortunately, I did not think to do this last time I was working on a long format comic, but in any case, moving right on. So finally, I can talk about the process of translating the script into the thumbnails. So while I write the script, I actually don't look anything up, and for the most part, I'm very focused on organizing the events. First, I typically list them in point form and then write it out in a more detailed script format. I'm not going to get into this because it's irrelevant to this particular video. I'll probably talk about it in some other video, but yes, so the step after having a final script for me is to do the reference gathering part of the process, where I read over the script a couple of times. I find places, maybe specific moods or just something, anything that I want to create a inspiration board for that comes up in the script. Sometimes it's more concrete things, sometimes it's more random, just general things to help me get some sort of ideas. But yes, I sometimes make a list actually of locations. In this particular case, there is only one location, so obviously I didn't have to make a list for that. But yeah, I created a pure ref board for myself, and I basically just dropped a bunch of things into it, and I'm actually going to show you my prologue inspiration board and kind of just go over what's in it and how I used it, or what I use it for. And right before I do that, I do want to tell you about my sponsor, Squarespace, which is amazing, and thank you so much to them for sponsoring my channel so I can continue to make these videos for you guys. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence for your business. I myself have been using Squarespace for my main portfolio website for years, and naturally when I was looking for places to host my original webcomic, Squarespace was my top contender, but I wasn't sure how things were going to go because typically webcomics are hosted using blog-style websites, and there's been some complicated coding from what I've heard, but I'm super happy to report that Squarespace was very easy. It was a total breeze. The freeform editor allowed me to create the landing page exactly how I wanted to, with custom button images and a parallax background and a logo as large as I want, which is very large, as you can see. So the backhand is very straightforward. Editing and posting new pages is super easy, and the fantastic thing is that I can always add a custom shop directly to the site in the future if I need to. I highly recommend using Squarespace. If you want to try it out for yourself and make a website portfolio or host your webcomic or anything, you can head over to squarespace.com and sign up for a free trial so you can test out all the amazing features. Once you're ready to launch your website, you can go to squarespace.com/cosmicspectrumart for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. That's squarespace.com/cosmicspectrumart for 10% off. All right, so here we have my reference board. Okay, I'm actually for the first time ever recording audio at the same time as recording the screen, so wish me luck. Hopefully it doesn't take forever and doesn't have a bunch of useless footage like right now. Okay, so this is the overall board. As you can see, PureRef is just a one type of, this is a very simple program. It doesn't have any buttons or interface or anything. If you want to make any changes, you just kind of right click and then it has some options. And the best feature in this little app is that, first of all, you can expand as much as you want. So you can put in as many images as you want. You can paste images like straight. You can just click an image and then drag it straight into the board from the internet. So that makes it really quick to find stuff and populate your reference stash and whatnot. And the final thing that's the best about this app is that if you have Photoshop open, you can just change the size of this board and you can just put it to the side and it will hover over Photoshop even if you're actually using Photoshop. So there's that. I just used Photoshop to get a little snippet of the script, the first version of the script, so I can show you guys what it was, because I did end up changing it afterwards and I'll hopefully go over that. But okay, so this is the first version of the script. So I'm just gonna quickly read it to you and then I'll kind of just like explain things one after the other. So chapter 1, scene 1, prologue, the aftermath of the hunt, Gloamingvale, early 1600s. Page 1 and 2, double page spread of Hagen in the swamp with a panel close-up of her unconscious face, clearly visible, freshly stitched up wounds on her face and neck. She's dressed in a dirty white sleeping gown. Her hair is tangled and full of twigs and leaves. The mood is somber and eerie. There's fog and light rain. Page 3, a raindrop lands on her eye, the one that's still intact, and she slowly opens it. She sits up and looks at her shaky hands. She touches her neck and chest. Her hands linger on her chest scar. It's very unsightly, crude stitching, and it's looking sore and inflamed. Page 4. Her face looks panicked as her hands claw at the scar. She makes redacted, and then she whispers, "Where is it?" She staggers up and wanders into the forest. Page 5. She emerges into a clearing and looks ahead. Her point of view is a long shot of the hotel, old grand mansion, castle-like, unkempt and abandoned. It looks cold and unwelcoming, enveloped in light fog, dreary and lifeless. She hesitates as fear washes over her. So this is typically how I approach writing the script. It's not super descriptive. For the most part, if I describe stuff, it's like mood related, and I'll mention the elements like fog and rain, and I guess because the prologue doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue, there's more description than usual. And for when I just started doing this, I did decide to just right off the bat divide it into pages in my head just as I'm picturing it when I'm writing it. And after, I thought this might be a fool's errand because I've worked with a script once before where that was done and it ended up being totally different from how I thumbnailed it. But when I'm the one writing the script, I found eventually that I'm actually not bad at guessing the amount of pages, and it does end up being similar. So that is the first snippet of the prologue, and I redacted some stuff because it might be getting into the spoiler territory, but in any case, so I've got a location here. There's the forest, swamp, or whatever, and then there's the old castle mansion, and I basically just went into Pinterest, and the first couple of things that I put in are always these right here, and they are the character reference images. So I have Hagen with her gown, for reference, obviously, because I don't remember what everything looks like, so I always need references for my own characters. And then we've got Nemo, and so these are the two in the prologue. Then here I just have a couple of inspiration images that I generally like. The mood, the colors, something about them, and there's more over here. So I will add stuff like that if something just strikes my fancy. And then as I go through the script, I find more and more specific references that I tend to organize into little clumps of images, as you can see here. So one of the first clumps of images is just things that I like where the atmosphere and the mood with the tones is really captured well. So there's a few images by some of my favorite artists over here that I like. and I sometimes gather references to approach rendering certain elements that I need to be working with. Like for instance, here there's a lot of foliage and like trees and lots of natural things, and I have some go-to ways that I draw those things, but in order to keep things interesting, I definitely like to look around at other people's illustrations to see if I can pick up some techniques or like just some approaches texturally or otherwise that I can bring into my artwork just to keep things more interesting. And yes, so for the most part, I think I do have photos. So right here, I have this whole section with all these photos that are just mood inspiration for how I imagine this scene to be, like just any sort of little things that help me get much more into the mood of the scene or whatever's going on. So there's a bunch of things right here. And then obviously I needed references for the castle, and I'm not going to show you the 3D model here, but I did get a 3D model for the castle because it is a location that's going to appear many times throughout the comic, and these images I found are kind of like the stepping stone. So this is what I had in mind, like the type of building, and so I found this perfect building, and I happened to find a bunch of different images of it, and I actually even found, I think this is a different building, but it's similar enough that I could use this to like figure out what it looks like from above and stuff. It's super useful. It's great. And yeah, just little things. And I did work with somebody else for the 3D model. Essentially, whatever. Long story short, I have a 3D model and I use that in the comic. I'll probably talk about it some other time. And yes, so more specifically for other scenes, like I know at some point there's going to be a courtyard. And before I keep going with this, this board is something I use all the time, and it evolves all the time. So I'll add things to it very frequently as I'm moving along in the process. So when I just started on the thumbnails, like half of these images weren't here. Sometimes I just come across a situation where I need more, and then I will just go and find some stuff. And I had the thumbnails pasted in here afterwards for when I was done with them and I was ready to move on to the final rendering, where actually you can see all the pages here without the text, because I just wanted to look at them all at once like this, and pretty pleased with the results actually, with how there's color continuity and whatnot. And while I was working on the final pages, I also pasted in some references for myself of my previous work, just to get like a reminder of how far I went into the line work before I would move into the final rendering of certain pages. So these are things that just personally help me. I tend to be very dependent on previous experience, and if I can't remember something, I'll just go back in my files and find it so I know how far to go with every single step, because my process is so meticulously divided into steps. And so this is the gist of my reference board, and as I've told you before, it does go through many additions over time as I keep working on it. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this footage that I had in the background at the beginning of the video and now. So this is a miracle that I actually recorded the process of thumbnailing, because it's something I hate to do because I take so many pauses to just think. It's honestly a really mentally grueling process where I just constantly have to close my eyes and try to picture things and think about it. So as you saw previously, like so many iterations of certain panels, I'll just draw and erase and try different poses, different compositions here and there. Some pages are a lot easier than others. Sometimes I will keep versions and just paste them above to maybe go back to them later, depending on how the next few pages go, etc. I wanted to show you this recording specifically just so you get a more realistic kind of idea of how this process goes, because you really can't see any of this when you see the final finished thumbnail file. So that's the reason, and thankfully I did have the footage. But For the next part of this video, I'm actually just going to show you the finished first draft of the thumbnails, and basically go over why I decided to revisit them later on and change a lot of things. And I will just like go over why I made a bunch of different choices. So yes. Okay, so I'm using PureRef once again, and I'm discovering that it's actually great for this presentation type of recording where I can just move around and zoom in and show you guys things. So, okay, let's just go over this initial first draft of the prologue thumbnails, which ended up being 12 pages, and I let sit for quite some time, and then upon revisiting, I decided that it needs to go through some major changes. So I'm just going to tell you guys what I decided was really not working, and how I will show you the final version of the thumbnails afterwards and show you how I fixed these things. So when I went over the prologue, I let it sit for quite some time, like I mentioned, and the first thing that I decided was that the beginning was much too generic. It just struck me as like I could just think of random movies and just other comics as well, where the beginning is some freaking bird establishing like the view, and then the bird lands, and then anyways, so that's kind of what I went with at first because it sort of made sense to me. I wanted to show some scenery and maybe establish the mood, and I didn't want to just cold open on her body in the water. I don't know why. You know what? It might not have been such a bad thing to just open with that, because there's really no reason for this bird other than to just take us from the sky to where the action's at, which is in some swamp, right? So like you see here in the script, she's in the swamp. And the first thing that I decided was something that I had to just make peace with is the fact that I spent about 10 years or more picturing the scene, because this scene was always huge. It was like a big scene, and I've pictured it so many times. I've even drawn it multiple times before, and so, you know, the pressure was palpable for me to recreate it at long last in comic form. But after thinking about it, I realized that there's really no need for me to cling to the scene the way that I imagined it all those years ago. So Hadrian was always supposed to wake up in the swamp for some, like, because I just wanted it that way. And I don't remember why I decided, but I realized that that is actually not that important. The important thing is that she wakes up. It doesn't matter where she, like, the swamp is not that important, you know. So I thought about it, and I decided that that probably needs a change, and I wanted to ditch this whole bird introduction thing because the bird is completely redundant and it's almost like goofy in a way, so I really kind of wanted to get rid of that. And then there's a couple of actions that I thought did not read well and were just so unclear, and since they were so unclear that you can't tell what's going on anyways, I decided to get rid of them altogether. And then I thought that the pacing was a little off, because I figured her getting from point A to point B and coming across the castle over here is just too fast. So it only taking one page just seemed kind of too quick to me. And then also the way that she's approached by Nemo, I figured just looks too creepy. Like, it wasn't supposed to be creepy, but it really's got that horror vibe. So I'm like, okay, there is definitely a horror vibe here, but yeah, not the way that it's portrayed on this page. So I thought I wanted to change that. And then I also thought that this whole thing kind of went too quickly as well. And I think that's about it. Like, basically, I wanted to rethink the very first couple of pages, the introduction, and I decided that maybe there's just not enough information in this prologue. So, as such, I went back to the script and actually rewrote it before I decided to redraw the thumbnails. So this is the final version of the thumbnails for the prologue, and as you can see, it expanded quite a bit. It ended up being 18 pages long, and I'm very happy with that length. I think it accomplished what I was trying to do with it much more successfully than the first draft. And so Now I will explain how I fixed the mistakes, or like basically the shortcomings that I clocked in the first version. And so this is the rewritten version of the first few pages. I'm not going to go over the entire thing, but here it is. I mean, I don't even know if I should bother reading this, but basically, as I was rewriting it, I did write out quite a bit of, basically I came up with a different introduction to what's going on with her, and I decided to place it in the actually important location versus it just being some random swamp in the forest nearby, because there was really no reason for it not to be the same location as where she stumbles into later. So I'm not gonna get into it because I am like, okay, you guys, one of the reasons why it took me so long to make this video in the first place is because I just really didn't want to talk about this in detail because I didn't want to spoil anything, because I don't know, this is like a pretty central event in the whole story, and I don't want to like talk about it too much, but whatever, for the sake of education, I will go over it. So the first thing is that the castle, as you might gather, is an important location in the story, and I saw no reason to not just start with it instead of starting with the character. And so it's more predictable that way, you know, in some ways, is because, you know, typically you'll have just like the big overall establishing shot, and then you will just inch closer to where the action's at. So that's exactly what I did over the first couple of pages here, and I did it in a better paced way, and I came up with a much better set for the scene than just a random swamp. And I'm really glad that I was able to essentially just cut that after so many years of having pictured it one specific way. And there is something liberating, because, you know, sometimes I do have a tendency to cling to an old idea even when it came out of, you know, nothing in particular. It's just there's sometimes when you picture something one way, you just get used to it, and the more you picture it, the more it becomes like, oh, this is how it should be. But, you know, there's something really liberating about having come up with a much better version of that and just letting go of the initial version. So I decided to include just a little more context with this dream sequence over here, just before she comes back into consciousness, because it is significant, and I think it just improves the pacing a little bit. And also, I don't know, spoiler or not spoiler, but there will be lots of dream sequences, and dreams are a component of the story. So it felt apt to include it that way. And I also took more time with her just waking up, and I cut some of the just unclear panels where she was like doing random things that did not really make any sense and weren't clear as to what was going on. And they changed the introduction of Nemo to be much less creepy like it looked in the first version. And I just wanted to include just a little more context to their relationship. So here showing her, like, him appear somewhere else and her being relieved to see him and like running towards him, and also stepping over the circle, as you can see here, which is important. So it gives you like more information, hopefully, that they do obviously know each other, and they're familiar, like they love each other, and that's important information. Anyways, and then afterwards, the rest of it is somewhat similar, but again, I added a couple of panels. And actually, let me see, what was the last? Okay, so the very last page, the last two pages are similar, they're almost the same, but I just added a couple of pages in between here. So as you can see, I wanted to include more context, like I mentioned, which I did over here because it was way too vague in the first draft. And then also, this is kind of funny, this is not like super relevant, but there was this one page where, oh, actually, okay, all right. So this one page right here, this one, I, for some reason, couldn't draw that top panel, like, to save my life. And I ended up changing it just because it just wasn't working out, no matter how many times. I must have redrawn it, like, 5 times or something. So this is the final page right next to it here. And let me just zoom into this. So, actually, no, I shouldn't zoom into it because there's text there that's out of date. Anyways, So yeah, over here she was supposed to just like kind of land in his arms, and man, something about that angle just like was not working for me, and I just couldn't do it. And so I just split it into 3 panels, and which in the end I think actually ended up helping quite a bit with distributing the text properly. And then I also changed the bottom couple of panels as well, because I figured these worked a little bit better, because here for some reason we're zooming out, or instead we're kind of getting to the heart of the matter, so we really shouldn't be zooming out at any point in these panels. And yeah, so some of these decisions, like I meant, like the size of the character's face in the panel, like how close the camera presumably is to their face, yeah, it's like basically the intensity of the situation. The more intense whatever is being communicated is, typically the closer you want the face to be to the camera. And I don't know how obvious this type of stuff is, but yeah, those are some of the things that I would take into consideration. But yeah, overall, as you can see, my approach to paneling is relatively simple. I don't do anything too crazy as far as you know, being like trying to be super creative with the paneling, or trying to come up with something new. Yeah, I tend to just be rather utilitarian with it, and I do like a lot of horizontal panels, probably because they're more akin to like a widescreen cinematic type of look. And I like these short succession, smaller vertical panels when there's some sort of conversation happening. Those are very useful. And when there's a little more action going on, sometimes I will add a tilt to, well, but it's also compositional, right? Because it just adds a little bit more dynamic, a bit more of a dynamic feel, and it also looks a little bit better. And as you can see, the bottom of this panel kind of just like even points towards his eye, which helps, which I think looks much better than if something like this was just straight cut off. And yeah, those are just some basic decisions over here. Some things are untranslatable. When I was picturing the dream sequence couple of pages, I really wish I could somehow recreate the glass shattering effect, but it just can't be done in a comic that is static and will be printed. So unfortunately, I had to settle for just this panel as is. And yeah, I don't know, I might actually revisit that at some point later, because I actually created this panel on in a different group of layers over top of everything else. So maybe somehow I will try to redo the shattering thing, but not right now. And yeah, so quick, just look through the finished pages. There it is. These are without the text, obviously, which I added afterwards. And for the most part, this is it. I might do a bigger, kind of more detailed deep dive into how I panel, but I think this actually covered a lot of information, and I was glad to show you guys the first version versus the final version side by side. And see, this is the kind of stuff where, for this reason, I'm hesitant to go really quickly on this comic, because time does help to make things better in the long run. But again, you know, it's kind of like concessions have to be made, and I accept the fact that it took me so long to do the prologue just because of how important it is, because it's the very first like opening scene. But going forward, it obviously shouldn't be as much pressure, because then we'll just get into the story slowly. And yeah, just a quick thing here. I'll tell you guys that I am obviously finished with the storyboards for the first chapter, and I'm just like in the middle of starting that. Here they are. I'm not going to zoom into them because I don't want to spoil anything, but there are quite a few more pages, obviously, in the first chapter than the prologue, and there's a lot of different stuff. A lot of the characters get introduced, and for that reason, I'm just taking my time with figuring things out beforehand. But yeah, I'm super excited to dive into it and continue sharing the story with you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm glad I finally made it. I hope that it was I hope it has some instructional value to those of you who are looking to work on your own comics, and I'm rooting for you guys. Like, this thing takes forever, and if it's a dream of yours, you should really hold on to it, because I've been holding on to it, God knows, for like 20 years at this point, and I'm finally doing it. So if I can do it, you can do it too. And yeah, just let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know if you found it useful and helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions, anything specific pertaining to comics that you'd like me to talk about. And yeah, I would love to take those into consideration for making future videos. So I hope you guys have wonderful holidays, and I will see you in the new year. Bye!